Without a sense of duality of something, how do we know ultimate questions, of consciousness, et cetera, unless we have something to compare it to, right? There's no duality. It's like I'm thinking here, but what's the opposite of that? What's the duality? I'm here, and I'm here, but compared to what? Not existing, and of course when that is a perception in many people, it sets up a sense of dread. It's an existential crisis, a sense of dread. So people, let's say who have cancer, terminal cancer, well, there's the pain of the actual cancer. And then there is the angst of having it. Am I going to die? And then there's the fear of dying and the pain of dying. And then there's the fear of not existing. And so some people with panic attacks have that, they call it the yips. And it's like, no, I'm not scared of dying. I'm scared of being dead, because what does that mean? Not existing. What does that mean? Well, imagine how you felt before you were born. You didn't exist. Well, you can't. And how do you feel about afterwards? Now, curiously, the one thing that seems to work on people who have this sense of dread is psilocybin. So there's been clinical trials done with psilocybin with people. It was done at NIH clinical trial on this existential.
And for people who don't know, sorry to interrupt. For people who don't know, when you say psilocybin, the active ingredient like magic mushrooms.
Correct. And
Okay.
and so in that case, they can dissociate the connections from an area of the brain called the mid-cingulate, right down the center cortical part. That's the medial part, which is part of the part that is the ownership to yourself, not connection to the outside world, ownerships to yourself. So there is that's different than sensing the outside world. And in that system, if the psilocybin seems to turn that off, and when you take that circuit out, you lose the dread. And so you have people that say, yes, I know I'm going to die and I know I'm in pain, but I don't care about it the way I did, which is this awful, this dread that is so terrifying. And so there you can see there is a sense of duality with this, because they understand the difference between existing and not existing at all. But how do you really understand that? Well, that's how accessible is that? Now, there are there are Eastern methods. We just had I was a science editor and an advisor to a film that just came out called Dali Lama, Scientist. Dali Lama called the Scientist, and it's won like 13 film festival awards in Europe. It came out in Europe, and now it'll be coming here. And basically, the Dalai Lama has always been not so much into science, but into things. He loves technical engineering things. Always did as a kid too. And it's about him and about the development of his interest in that, and taking his knowledge of Tibetan Buddhism from 2,300 years ago, that brand of Buddhism, and they have certain ideas about cosmology, about multiverses, multiple universes. They have ideas about the Big Bang. They have ideas about parallel universes. They have ideas about quantum mechanics. They don't call it that, but if you look at those insights that they had, it's basically that. It's quantum mechanics, and it's also cosmology as we know it. So I mean, my job was to go through, compare his teaching and that teaching to modern scientific thoughts about not only cosmology and quantum mechanics, but also cognitive sciences and genetics, where it's more of a stretch with them. But the other part, those insights, you can see it's in our head. Now, how is it in our head? Well, this is a question, and maybe this is maybe one of the ones that Noam Chomsky was talking about. He and I were advisors on a similar language project, by the way. And so anyway, so there's that, and then there's what's called the hard question of consciousness, to take it further. And the hard question of consciousness is, how do we get from synapses and circuits to the sense that we have right now of us, we're talking to each other? How do you get to that? How do you make that jump? And nobody can imagine how that happens. It just, we know a lot about the neurotransmitters, the genetics, the connections, all the neuroanatomy, the pharmacology, and we know a lot, but we don't know the most fundamental thing, which is called this hard a question of consciousness, which is how do we make that jump to this experience that we're having of being in the moment, as it were, and that feeling we have in our head of thought. You know, what is that about? So I think maybe that's what he was talking about.